Good morning. It's June 13th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live news, opinion, guest interview show. We cover a bit of everything. We talk about a lot of stuff. And hopefully, as I was talking to Nico about before, occasionally come up with some productive solutions for things. Otherwise, I just rant a lot and get stuff off my chest. But I think some other people share those things they're angry about. And maybe, as we get each other all stirred up, we can all actually come up with some good ideas and solutions out there. As you can see from the comments from Nico there and the comments in the scroll, comments are welcome. I like seeing that interaction, guys. That's what makes being live worth it, right? We can chat back and forth, maybe get somewhere, discuss things with each other, send questions for my guests. I don't necessarily get them all in, but I try to. And as always, try to keep it fairly civil, though, and don't spam the comment scroll, please. Good to see. I love seeing that. New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park, California, Woody coming in from down south. Awesome to see you guys. All right, so I'm going to start with a couple of the observances before, as everybody's getting logged on. I like to cover these important things. A couple of observances, and it's funny. There was a day today that seems like it was modeled for my wife, Jane. Now, she's got a very special day coming up. It's her birthday tomorrow. But the other observance today seems more modeled for her, and it's the Kitchen Klutzes of America Day. And hey, Jane, beautiful. I love you. You're a magnificent, fantastic woman, and I can't believe you still put up with me. But all the same, boy, there's the day for you. If we want to see somebody who can go through wine glasses and a number of things, it's Jane, and she's obviously not alone because they've made a whole day for Kitchen Klutzes. So, hey, make sure to give your local Kitchen Klutz a hug or demand that you be recognized for your klutziness and have it appreciated today. It's also Weed Your Garden Day. I think that just kind of goes all summer, though, doesn't it? I don't know. The only thing I can tend to grow in my garden, even though I try every year, is weeds. But maybe eventually I'll find weeds that just look half decent and keep those growing, and it'll look as if I did it on purpose. But either way, today is the day you're supposed to really get out there and rip those things out. We're supposed to get a few inches of rain in the next couple of days, so it might not be the best time for it. But hey, today's the day for it if you're up for it. Okay, I got a couple of guests coming up a little later, and it's going to be Dr. Bill Bewick of Fairness Alberta on what they're calling the unjust transition. His organization's been outspoken and working a lot on the equalization referendum. And it's basically Fairness Alberta, right? Well, this transition, of course, targets the West and targets Alberta in particular. So I'm certain Bill's going to have some things to say about that. And that's their latest release. I'm going to have Adam Patterson of the Korth Group. Now, this is a firearm distribution company, and they're Alberta based. And I want to talk about, something that gets lost when we talk about firearm bans and regulations, all these restrictions is there's actually an industry there, though. Keep that in mind. There are thousands of people who work in the firearms industry everywhere from sales and distribution to repairs to, shooting centers, you name it. Now, I want to talk a little bit from that industry perspective. When you go out there and you attack any kind of industry, typically you get some pushback and stand up for themselves, but firearms distributors, well, they seem sometimes not allowed to stand up for themselves. So it'll be a good conversation with Adam there. So now, yes, I'm going to get on to what's got me ranting today to start things out. And I guess in a sense I should celebrate. The mainstream media has finally stood up and taken notice of the fact that Calgary's city transit's become a drug and crime-ridden dystopian nightmare. Our state broadcaster, the CBC, sent a reporter out to ride Calgary's trains for a few hours. And she reported on it honestly. She saw chronic open drug use, aggressive addicts, and no less than 3 overdose incidents. Yeah, that's just one ride, guys. Well, one day anyways. In interviewing other riders, she was greeted with a plethora of stories of violence and drug use. People told her they avoid using transit whenever possible. And statistically, it matches up. Reported crime is up 47% on transit just this year. Unreported crimes are surely much harder, but many people have chosen not to ride transit any longer, or if they do, they just put their earbuds in and turn a blind eye into what they see going on around them. Getting on the phone could draw attention to yourself in a dangerous environment. Basically, people riding public transit have adopted a jailhouse mentality of introverted self-preservation. Just keep to yourself. I see nothing. The question I have to ask, though, is what the hell took them so long to notice? This issue didn't just spring up overnight. The horror story of Calgary's transit system is the consequence of willful ignorance on the part of civic officials and the mainstream media for a long time. They just hoped if they buried their heads in the sand long enough, this problem would fix itself. And unsurprisingly, it got worse, and it continues to do so. We've been reporting on this problem with the Western Standard for well over a year now. In February 2021, I wrote a piece on the issues with the train and accompanied it with a footage of a man smoking meth on there. For that, the Western Standard got kicked off YouTube for a week. turns out we're not allowed to show any footage of drug consumption, even when it's directly related to a news story. A policy of forced ignorance on the issue, basically. We've reported on the transit mayhem issue over a dozen times, all the same. We just take care to avoid the videos that'll get us banned. People need to see, though, just how bad it's gotten. Most people don't need to go downtown, and most of those who do, understandably, choose not to use transit, so they don't know how bad it is. Sharing videos and images of the mess, we can give people an idea of what it looks like on the trains and in the bus shelters these days. Unfortunately, we're not really allowed. One Calgary city councillor did what none of the other coddled councillors would. He went out and rode the train for a few hours last month. As with every commuter, he was greeted with a scene of violence, drug use, disorder, trash, and witnessed what appeared to be an overdose. He posted a picture of a person sprawled unconscious on the floor of the train. For that, Councillor Dan McLean was shouted down and accused of shaming vulnerable people. City council members and progressive media folks were enraged that he dares share his experience and that picture. What the progressive set in Calgary was most pissed about, though, was that McLean exposed the horror story on transit that they wanted to pretend wasn't happening. McLean was shattering the illusion of everything being fine. City council is acting like a bunch of children with their fingers screwed into their ears, shouting to avoid hearing what they don't want to hear. Well, it's too bloody bad, kids. You guys are being paid the big bucks to take on the tough issues, and this one's right in your lap, whether you like it or not. Calgary's city administration, much of the council, doesn't even want to admit there's a problem, much less deal with it. The consequences of their inaction on this file are dire, as multi-billion-dollar transit system has been abandoned by citizens and taken over by addicts. Last January, the city of Calgary closed a number of large LRT stations because of the encampments of addicts they weren't willing to handle. They remain closed today. Tax-paying transit riders have to shiver in the rain, wind, and snow while looking at a shuttered, heated station right next to them that they paid for. They still have to deal with the crime-ridden transit system as a whole, too, since closing the stations did nothing to address the problem. The cowardice on the part of city officials on this issue has to come to an end. The city of Calgary either needs to crack down and take back its transit system, or they may as well shut it down altogether, because doing nothing is no longer an option. Homelessness and addiction are complicated issues, and they need to be addressed. Letting an entire transit system turn into a de facto homeless camp and a rolling drug consumption system, though, isn't helping. Cleaning up the transit system is it's going to be a tough and ugly job. Police need resources, not the belittlement and using of defunding that they've gotten from many city council members. We need enforcement to remove the problematic people from the transit facilities and keep them off. And that's going to be a rough and probably dangerous job. There's likely going to be videos of law enforcement personnel physically dragging people out of the facilities or arresting them, and the usual anti-police suspects will indignantly howl about it. Those anti-police advocates don't have to ride the train, of course. So what are we to do with the troubled people once they've been removed from the transit facilities? Well, that's a good and a tough question, and we need to have some serious discussion about it. In the meantime, though, we have to accept that addicts don't belong on the transit system. Alternative media outlets, such as ours, were ignored by city officials. Now that the CBC has taken notice of the issue, perhaps something's finally going to be done. And I don't care what the catalyst for action on this is. I just want to see it acted upon. So that's what's got me wound up today. Like I said, a bit of a hats off to the CBC. I mean, again, better late than never. And maybe those clowns in city council will pop their fingers out of their ears long enough to realize what everybody else has been screaming at them for the last year and a half. All right, let's check in to the newsroom now with Eva Sudik. How you doing?
I'm good, Cory. Thanks for shedding light on the LRT situation in Calgary. Maybe CBC was doing hats off to you with that story.
I won't hold my breath on that either.
Today in the news, we have a similar story to last Monday. I checked in and we had an update on millions of COVID tests that had been shelved by the government. Well, today we've been enlightened to the thousands of ventilators that are being stockpiled. In a $237 million deal, 10,000 ventilators were ordered, and more than 9,000 of them are in the National Emergency Stockpile now. Another story, an unvaccinated Canadian living in New Zealand has not been able to visit home since the pandemic began. She recently reached out to Liberal MP Adam Van Koverden by sending an Instagram message explaining her story and asking for him to support removing restrictions. He then responded with an F you, along with some other degrading comments. Nuclear energy, yeah.
Are elected at their best. I wish they'd be more candid more often, actually. We get to really see who they are.
Yes, for sure. People should definitely go and read his other comments that he sent to that woman in that story there. We have a nuclear energy story where a CEO is asking for more taxpayer dollars to meet climate change targets set by the government. You can learn more about the millions spent on nuclear in Canada and how much Canadians have gotten back from that money. I wrote a story this morning about the many opponents of the Conservative Party leadership race that are pointing fingers at candidate Pierre Poilievre after he put out his membership number announcement. Now, Leslyn Lewis's party is saying that Poilievre campaign purposefully sold duplicate memberships, and John Charest made up a new word called Pierre inflation when talking about the numbers. Amanda will have a story coming out later today on the increase of gun interest that has spiked across Alberta and BC after the announcement of an impending gun ban. And we have our fearless leader, Trudeau, has tested positive for COVID this morning. Now, I've compiled a list of the different Trudeau hashtags that have been trending on Twitter the last couple months and the last couple weeks. Today is Trudeau for treason. But last week, it was Trudeau is destroying Canada. And before that, hashtag Trudeau must resign, Trudeau must go, Trudeau the tyrant, and Trudeau crime minister are the most popular ones.
Oh, isn't he the popular one indeed? Thoughts and prayers, though. I hope he recovers from it. What, his 4th or 5th bout with COVID now?
Yeah, and after how many shots, too, he claims to have had.
Well,
so
we'll
yeah,
see. I suspect Sophie probably won't catch it at least, so she'll be all right.
Yeah, I wonder who will catch it from him.
Good question.
But yeah, that's all we got in the news today.
All right. Well, thank you for keeping up on the news, writing it up, and coming in to share it with us today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Cory.
All right, Eva. I won't bug you too much today. That's Eva Sudik, and yes, she is one of our regulars in the newsroom, back from a very extended vacation where she was watching for Trudeau to be surfing over on the West Coast. Didn't manage to catch any footage of that, unfortunately. But as you heard and as you saw, we got a lot of stories, a lot of stuff breaking. We've got a number of reporters, and this is where I nag everybody and remind them, it's thanks to you guys who have subscribed that we can do this, and we really do appreciate it. We really do. We're selling a product. We appreciate you guys who bought it. You know, I like to keep reiterating that. We're not asking for charity or donations. So, hey, you want to donate money, fire it our way. But we are producing something, a product that people appreciate and they're willing to spend some money for, just like we do with everything else. And we're asking you to do it for this. It's $10 a month, $99 for a year, full unfettered access to everything we've got there up on our website, columnists, original news content, all that sort of stuff. And that's how we can keep expanding our technical abilities, our reporters across the country, and getting these original stories and some decent commentary. So you don't have to rely on the state broadcaster and CTV and things like that. You can have independent media, because we don't take tax dollars and we never will. I'll tell you, well, I know Derek will never accept it. I'm pretty confident. If he ever did, and again, I don't see it, that would be the last day I worked here. It's just not going to happen. So, hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, get on there. And if you have already, thank you. We really do appreciate it. All right, let's look at a little more of the discussion. I saw again, the complicated nature of this whole addiction and transit and a number of things. Boy, a lot of comments, and that's fantastic. But somebody was saying that he was talking about an incident, I guess, where somebody had fallen off the tracks and was impaired on a train station, and then police arrived and handcuffed the person, and apparently he felt it was because the person was Indigenous. I don't know. It's hard, but you see, here's some of the trouble they get into. The no-win situation. And I'm not saying that there's no prejudice that happens between law enforcement officers or peace officers with ethnic minorities, whether they're Indigenous or Black people. I mean, there's some preconceptions that are a problem. But the reality too, and again, it's not just anecdotal. You can, if you want, you can go out and look. And it's part of why this whole problem is big and complicated and sensitive. If you go out downtown, you go on the train, and First Nations people are very overrepresented among the community of those addicted. It's just, and that talks a lot more than how we have to deal with the socioeconomic mess that our First Nations are in right now. And that goes into bigger conversations about the reserve system and a whole bunch of things. But we have to have all these conversations. Now, law enforcement, you go in, though, and you do come in and restrain somebody, and perhaps inappropriately, you don't know when you enter on the scene. If it's somebody who's strung out on meth, and again, people have been working downtown, and we've seen them. There's some people who are just crazy. They're scary. They're strung out. They're moving around. They're out of control. And you can't just talk to them. You can't reason with them. So sometimes handcuffs will be the first option. It might have been a poor option in that circumstance. I don't know. But the job is tough, and they get crapped on no matter what they do. They got a bunch of us riding transit, or working downtown who are constantly complaining, saying, clean it up. And the second they do, if anybody puts out any footage of them actually in the process of doing it, they get crapped on for that too. So it's ugly and it's problematic. And as I said, we got to deal with it. Otherwise, we just may as well just give away the system. We might as well. It's that bad. It's been since 2 years, and they can't blame COVID anymore. I mean, downtown's mostly filled. The parking lots are filled. I drive down here. I mean, the vacancies are still bad for the commercial buildings, but those who can work downtown are. But they aren't taking the train. They won't. They can't. And 64% is what the levels are at compared to 2 years ago on the train. So, almost 2/3 of Calgarians have said, no, we are not going to ride it. Do something about it. This council just pretends as if there's nothing they can do. Chris Gibson saying, why aren't we consulting with First Nations about finding a solution, working together? I think we are. It's just hard. There's a lot of First Nations Indigenous outreach programs and facilities, things in reserves as well, and countless, educational and treatment things. Obviously, it's just not quite enough. And we've got to look at all of these things. There's no easy things. As I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I might talk with them later, and on another show, but this is we've got a number of problems going on. The first one I want to hit on today, though, is the trains are not consumption centers. The stations are not consumption centers. They aren't homeless shelters. It's a transit system. It's a place where people pay to safely move from one part of the city to the other, and it's become unsafe, and it is falling apart. I mean, literally, they've locked down a number of stations. We paid for those stations. They're sitting there locked up for 6 months now because the city's too afraid to actually evict the addicts from within them. Now, again, yes, you can't just kick them out. Well, you can, but it's not going to help anything. Then you got the bigger problem, the harder problem, in fact, which is trying to find ways to deal with the epidemic of addiction that we got going on right now. So let's start with the easier problem, though, and taking it out of where it doesn't belong. And that's on the trains. It's on transit. We've got to accept that it's unsustainable. That's a word they love in City Hall, sustainability. Well, this current mess on city transit is not just trains. Drive along. Go on McLeod. Pull in front of that bus shelter in front of Chinook Station. 9 out of 10 times, there's people passed out or in the process of consuming drugs in them. Likewise, on 9th, when I drive on there every day, there's a bus shelter. Again, there's always somebody passed. You don't want to stand in there. Your average person doesn't want to deal with that. And we can't pretend that addicts are always harmless. They're out of control sometimes, and they can be aggressive and dangerous. So let's accept that and start working from that. It doesn't mean you set aside all compassion. It doesn't mean you don't want to help these people. It doesn't mean you don't understand that they're in a bad place and we'd like to get them into a better spot. It just means that we've got to work with what we've got in front of us right now first. Get them out of where they don't belong, and then we can start working on the other problems. Let me speak about one of our sponsors as I move on to more different subjects of ranting, and that is Bitcoin Well. So yes, and here's an area I don't believe any of the drug dealers take Bitcoin yet, though nothing would surprise me anymore, I guess. Actually, I guess some digital currencies have been used for odd things now and then. Either way, that's certainly not what I'm suggesting it for. But if you want to get away from federal currencies, get away from the old school fiat currencies, digital currencies are the way to go. And they're huge, they're growing, but not all of us know, well, what's a trustworthy way to get into it? How do you learn how to get into these digital currencies? How do I buy into it? Well, that's what these guys are about. They're a publicly traded Alberta bricks and mortar company. They can help set you up. They get free one-on-one consultations. They're like a financial advisor of any kind, any other kind. You can sit there and speak with a real person, find out what they offer. Maybe it's not for you. It's up to you, or maybe it is, and they can show you all the different ways you can use it, how it's practical. They bring it home to you. It's not just some ethereal foreign sort of thing. It's real. So check them out. If you're looking to get into digital currencies, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff they offer a little later in the show. Bitcoinwell.com. They've been a great sponsor for us for quite some time now, and it's because they offer a good product, guys. That's why they're doing really well. All right, let's see what else we got through the comments here. Sam Short, talking about, I'm pretty sure it was sarcastic saying legalize drugs. Yeah, it's a mixed thing when you come to the decriminalization talk and stuff like that. You don't want to legalize the drugs altogether because, it doesn't matter because then you just got more gangs and others that are pushing it and it still causes the damage. Some people say if you legalize it, you'll get nothing but safe supply. No, you won't. The dealers will get it. They'll step on it, which means they're going to cut it in with something else. And that's where some other danger will come, even if they get some better supply to start with. Unfortunately, it's a simplistic solution to a bigger problem. But trying to jail somebody because they have a minor amount of meth or heroin or something awful on them. It's not to say you want them to consume these things. It's not saying it's a good idea to just consume those things. But are you solving anything by charging people who are in that condition? No, not really. So that's where you get more towards decriminalization rather than legalization. It's still criminal, but how many resources do you want to chase going after somebody who's a consumer of it? Hey, hit those dealers, I mean, I don't believe in opening it wide open. And but it's hard. I mean, the war on drugs, how long has that been going on since the Reagan administration brought it in the 80s? It didn't work. The drugs kept coming. You keep spending more resources and the drugs keep coming. You got to work on the demand side. And that's where we get the tougher area, addictions treatment. The one way to undercut a dealer is to take away one of his clients and not on a stretcher for a change, but have him go into rehab and get off of that crap. And that is how you stop that chain. Not easy. Not easy. And it's a never-ending battle. There's no solution. There's no finish for it. As long as there's humans and as long as there's drugs, unless there's somebody comes up with a magical treatment where you can give an injection and a person is suddenly loses all cravings, loses all addiction, then you can move on from there. But we aren't there yet. And in the meantime, we just have to keep working and mitigating on it. And this whole problem, and you see, I get angry and I curse and I talk about the ones we see on the trains in downtown because they make me nervous when I'm walking downtown and things, but they're also people. They really are. I mean, these were somebody's children. This is somebody's parents. This is somebody's uncles, aunts. And they fell into this mess. I've got 3 friends now. I've mentioned this on the show before who have lost kids to drug, they call it poisoning, whatever you want to call it. But they died addicted, young. And this isn't people from the ghetto. This isn't ethnic minorities. This isn't dysfunctional, awful families. It's happening everywhere. And those who might not end up dying, some of them, they end up just so dysfunctional, they end up on the streets. They didn't start there. So we got a whole lot to work on. But let's not dismiss the people who are out there. They're people as well. I mean, I like the term compassionate conservatism. We can still be angry, hard-headed, ranting sort of people, but still care for our fellow persons. And we always talk about taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. Somebody who is in the throes of addiction can't take care of themselves. They can't. It's an awful thing. I've mentioned it on the show before. I'm an alcoholic, a recovering one. It's been years since I've had a drink. I don't imagine I'm going to have one again for a long time. I put a few things up my nose over a period of time in the past as well. I got out of that mess, thankfully. Not everybody does. But I understand I couldn't have done it without support. I couldn't have done it without help. So if you hit bottom, you need help. And where is it going to come from? So let's not be too heartless, or even take the selfish point of view as a conservative. Because out of control addicts cost us on many, many levels. If you're just looking for your own benefit, if you can save any of these addicts, any of them, if they aren't in jail, if they aren't taking up hospitals, if they aren't collecting welfare, if they're actually out there working, paying taxes like everybody else, hey, that's a win. Like, you're going to win. So I don't like using and that's something around the standard we talk about a lot. Whenever you talk about government spending being an investment, and it's a loathsome way to use it. But this is one of the areas I kind of see it. If you could have successful drug treatment, that's an investment in that person that we do all benefit from later on, because otherwise they just become an ongoing expense. Gondek said Calgary needs to be patient. These meth heads, this is from Laura, are unpredictable and dangerous. And that's it. And there's different types of drugs. There's a lot of things. Meth is the one, I believe, though. I saw it a lot when I worked in the eastern states. It was there kind of ahead of here. But you really see it gaunt and pockmarked, and the teeth are gone. And it turns people into zombies. It eats them alive. But it also makes them, they can get very aggressive. Their minds get just messed right up. And they're scary. These are the ones you don't want to sit across. If somebody fires up some heroin or something, it just knocks them down. That's the one you'll just see passed out and laying there, which is, again, catastrophic and dangerous. And they often overdose, or fentanyl or other opioids, things like that. So there's a number of different substances, unfortunately, that are out there that are hitting people and damaging them. So that's what I meant as well, is it's a very complicated realm. One of the other things is talking about harm mitigation. At least we try to save people long enough so we can get them into treatment. And that CBC story I was referencing, she talked about how she saw naloxone administered a number of times. In a couple of cases, though, it sounds like the person was smoking meth, and actually the naloxone won't hurt them, but it won't do anything for it either. It's an opioid counter thing, not for something such as methamphetamine. But I mean, just so people know, if you see somebody in distress and down and you don't know what they took, and if you do have naloxone, give it to them. You're not going to hurt them. So, take a chance and give it to them. Even if it doesn't help, the worst thing, that'll happen is it won't help. This is Johnny saying opioids and the rest of the street drugs come from the same supplier, different systems. Yeah, I mean, there's only so much where the opioid poppies and all that base thing comes from, and it gets scattered through a number of areas, through China and so on. And stopping it when we got borders as large as ours isn't going to be easy. Richard saying, yeah, when life's getting hard, people look for an escape. Government makes life harder and harder every year. And there's no doubt that the pandemic was a contributing factor. If you look at the addiction stats, the overdose stats, the deaths, the spike and the correlation is undeniable between the timing of when the pandemic came in and when the addictions really went up. I mean, this issue was becoming bad prior to that. It was already happening. But the pandemic has definitely made it worse. It's put stress on people. It's isolated people. There's one of those things with those clowns, those pro lockdown lunatics that we still have a few left out there, that feel that it just doesn't damage people by locking things down. It doesn't damage people by turning our lives into these introverted worlds where we work from home, do Zoom meetings, and mask ourselves everywhere we go. Human contact for our mental health is one of the most important things we have. That's how you build a real support system. That's where you really have somebody to turn to if you have a problem before you turn to a drug or something like that. So we can't pretend for a second that the response, and I'm not blaming the pandemic, I'm saying the response to the pandemic caused damage. It hurt people, and it contributed to the addiction epidemic, and it is an epidemic. It's always been there. We know that. Anybody who's been to Vancouver back in the 80s and 90s, East Hastings, it was always a heroin-laden mess over there with a lot of addicted people. In Calgary, for those old enough to remember, Inglewood, which is a trendy little area now, used to be a nightmare. If you went there in the early 90s, this was not a part of town you wanted to go to, the National Hotel, and that's where the heroin addicts hung out. They were always there. It was not like this, not with people everywhere. I mean, you see it in the suburbs, you see it on the trains, you see it downtown. This is well beyond anything we ever had to deal with. And again, here's another example of how it's just impacting people too. Kim Woligorsky saying her son at 21 worked for Paladin Security in Lethbridge and revived a person a day with naloxone. Yeah, that Lethbridge Park down there is scary. And again, it's the fentanyl and the rest down on the blood reserve has been just brutal, an epidemic for some years. Lethbridge is getting it hard, but he said he had to quit. He was so upset over it. And yeah, I wrote a column about an overdose, and I'm pretty sure it's failed. If you look it up, I ran across it on the way to work a while back, and it was horrible. And it shook me up. It was a young man, and it was pointless, and he died. And it's happening every day. The addictions in Alberta, I think it's up to overdoses are 4 a day, I think, and BC's getting up to 5 that are dying. And people talk about, look at the death rate from COVID. Look, COVID's killing the dying. Hey, we got to take it seriously. It's a serious ailment and the rest, but come on, let's look at the statistics. We got 2 years of it. And the people it kills tend to be people who are already had a whole bunch of other conditions, often very late in life. In other words, they were going to pass. Maybe it sped it up. We certainly want to slow that down as much as possible. But this opioid epidemic is killing the young. It's killing our up-and-comers. I mean, again, we want to save everybody, guys, but come on, admit it. I mean, it's probably a little more worthwhile to try and save the 19-year-old who's just starting their life over the 89-year-old who's morbidly obese with diabetes and emphysema who happened to get knocked off by a COVID as a final straw. We got to prioritize and get a little realistic here. But unfortunately, politics misses into everything. But as I said with the other gentleman, who was working security, and we're talking literally, first responders are dealing with this a lot too. PTSD. They don't want to see people dying in front of them. And I've talked to others. I mean, as we know, I've been on the health and paramedic situation for quite some time. Speaking of stories I've been going on about for months and months and months around here. That's another one of their frustrations with some of the people where they're applying the naloxone to over and over and over the same person over and over and over again. I mean, it's supposed to be a one-off. It's supposed to be a rare thing, not a constant catch-all in case you screw up. We got a big problem. We got a really big one, and it's spilled onto our transit. It's spilled into our households. I had a doctor. I'm forgetting his name he was on one of my past shows. He specializes in addictions treatment, and something interesting he told me was, again, 60% actually of the overdoses happen in people's households. It's just the stuff we see on the streets. We see it visibly. We see the people, the zombies, the people in rough condition. But there's a lot of addicts who are still in homes And that's where they're dying too, and they're getting into trouble. Like, this is a lot deeper than you even see outside. And a lot of those first responders are hitting those places over and over again too. I spoke with another person who was speaking on harm mitigation. And I guess they do Zoom style safe consumption systems where a person, they know they're going to inject or consume whatever the hell they're going to, they do it from home, and they have a health nurse watching them do it so that if they suddenly slump over a flat line, they can call an ambulance. Now we start walking that fine line between, are we enabling or are we saving? I mean, we do want to save the lives. We can't treat them if they're dead. But how long do you want to keep dragging it out to just keep supervising their consumption and keep sending ambulances when they slump over? Man, we just got a lot to work on. But either way, starting to get back to where I began. Looks like my guest is absent for some reason. That's why I'm rambling at length more than I typically do. I'm not sure what's happened, but we still got lots to talk about, and I got another guest coming in a bit, so we'll cover some more news issues as we work towards that. And let's see here what we got going on. So yes, that Liberal MP that Eva was talking about, Adam van Coverden, so some Dutch heritage, I imagine, messaged a woman on Instagram, F you, in response to her inquiry about ending vaccine mandates for travel. She was saying, I was a teacher, got fired for not taking the jab. I'm a supply teacher covering classes every single day because all the jab teachers have COVID and can't work, but I can't come home to visit my family. But yeah, this is the cult of COVID going on, right? These liberal MPs, they don't, you see he apologized. Don't they always? It's a little after the fact. I'm not saying he should be resigning. That's fine. Get off your butts and fire him. It's one of those things that drives me nuts in politics, and everybody at the drop of a hat, resign. I mean, unless they've committed a crime or done something really and it does happen. We got an NDP member. I'm still waiting on the charges with that fella going on out here with his hacking in Alberta. But I mean, if it was just something like that, document it, remember it. If the arrogant jerk is that bad, fire him in the next election. But unfortunately, we don't. We keep rewarding him, keep putting him back in. So, this person now resides in New Zealand, and that was part of the problem. She hasn't been able to visit her family since the pandemic began in 2020. And, I don't want to go into a discussion of the value of the vaccines themselves, but the reality of the mandates are pointless. They're spiteful. They're punishing. They're harming people. And then to get a response from somebody who's been harmed, somebody who's had a problem with this, who's having direct issues because of it, you could even say, I sympathize, but I disagree. I think you're wrong. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you choose to get vaccinated or blah, 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 which I wouldn't agree with, but all the same, you could respond that way. But just to tell her to F off shows that arrogance, that entitlement, that level that these liberals are in, where they feel just have the right to tell you to piss off. And if we don't fire them at the polls, maybe they're right. Of course, then we start getting into the regional area, and we got some bigger problems. So maybe we're willing to fire them out here, but others in other regions don't want to get rid of them, and that's where we got to start getting some more regional autonomy, if not outright independence. But that's a separate rant altogether now, isn't it? Coddling users with safe injection, etc., helps addicts waste their lives. Commenter Jet Gordon. And again, you see, there's I'm mixed. We can't treat them if they're dead. And a lot of them are dying of the overdoses. But as I said as well, if we just keep doing it over and over, then we are just enabling it, and we're just dragging out a slow death, which is an awful thing. So where do we go with it? Talking to that doctor, it was Monty Ghosh was his name. And he also pointed out, he was honest with me, because this hang up that some progressives and others have with safe consumption sites, and they're hung up on it. They really put too much stock in it. I don't want to see them gone, but we can never have nearly enough to actually address what they think they're addressing. And as he said, if it's outside of 500 meters, they don't go to them. Because I asked him during the interview, I said, I walk to work, I start my walk only a few minutes away from the Sheldon Tumor consumption site, and I'm running across passed out, addicts. I'm running across discarded syringes. I'm seeing old pipes. If they're not close and it's not convenient, they aren't going to use them. And we can't have one every 5 blocks, guys. That's not reasonable. What I do think is if we could have them in appropriate places, decent places, though, maybe some are going to be at that point where, the ones that are a little more responsible, they're trying to stay alive, they're going to those sites. But what we got to do is really offer them ways to get out of those sites. How are you going to get off this crap? How are you going to get treated? We're not just keeping you alive today. We want to keep you alive in the long run. So here's your treatment options. Here's how we can get you off this crap. But they seem to be fixated on just if we can facilitate, give clean supply. Well, no, guys, there's no clean long-term supply of meth. Sorry, there's no such thing. That garbage will eat them alive over time, no matter what. And yes, there's a problem. Coke, I read about some Coke having laced with fentanyl before, which really screwed with some people. It killed them, because it's a whole different drug. I can't imagine. That's scary stuff. Back when I indulged in that crap, usually the worst thing they would put into it was baby laxative, which led to an outcome that was unpleasant, but wasn't killing people. So, having a clean supply certainly can stop some of the immediate damage that people get, but it's not the long-term thing. And there's no safe long-term way. Even if you had pure Coke, which is impossible to find, how long could you stay on it before it kills you? Because it will eventually. Same with any of those opioids, fentanyl, heroin. You're just dragging it out. It's not natural for you. It's not good for you. Likewise with alcoholics. I was an alcoholic. I could get good, clean, pure alcohol, or at least up to that 40-45% level and consume it in my bottles. Doesn't mean it's not going to eat my liver and shrivel it up like a prune eventually, or lead me to eventually lose judgment so much that I'll drive out somewhere and kill myself or somebody else. So just supplying me with quote unquote safe liquor isn't helping my problem. I had to stop drinking. And I'm not one of those, by the way. All of you people who can safely enjoy consuming liquor, great on you. I'm not one of those ones of feeling that everybody else has to dry up. I'm not a prohibitionist or anything of this sort. It's just some people can't consume alcohol responsibly. I'm one of them. I finally figured it out before I hit the bottom. But that's part of why I have that sympathy. I realized I might not have been one of those people. I might have ended up getting further in trouble and ending up in bottom myself. And, we have to remember that. So what's this? Micah Adam Marsden saying 90% of Coke in Canada these days is actually meth, according to one nurse's study. Snorting meth laced with fentanyl. Damn, yeah, I can't imagine. It's just so much of that crap. And I could see it, meth, it gives a speedy kick. I've never tried that stuff, and I never will. But I can see how that would be something you could cut into some crappy Coke to try and speed up your customers, I guess. Just makes it all the more dangerous. You hear about some of those, the other thing that kills so many, you hear about with celebrities, at least that's the only time you hear the autopsies. But they check their blood afterwards when they've died, and they realize that they got 5 or 6 different drugs in them. It's not just one quite often, it's a cocktail of things. But again, when you're hitting bottom, when you're getting in trouble, there's a great example as, rock stars, others, they've got lots of people around them. They've got lots of quality supply, and it still kills them because it's still not a good thing. There's not a safe level of that shit to take. All right, let's see. I've been on that for a bit now. Let's have a look here. $237 million contract. Let's talk about our government and their fine management of our money. Always one of my favorite subjects. So $237 million contract was surplus. There's millions of dollars worth of COVID ventilators purchased through, hey, go figure, a former Liberal MP's company. And they were immediately warehoused as medical surplus. So $23,700 each. Coincidentally, a former Liberal MP got the contract, $237 million. And they just popped him into a warehouse to sit and gather dust. Nice racket when you could do it. This is one of the areas where I'm talking about, yeah, these guys we should be looking at investigations and some jail time. That's criminal. It's just criminal. Come on. Don't tell me it's a coincidence that it's a Liberal that got that contract. Or maybe twisted some arms to show that we're actually selling you crap. And 90% of these ventilators were never used in a clinic or a hospital. And it was a sole source. There's those 2 words you got to remember in these contracts all the time. Sole sourced means they never even put it out to bid. Apparently, they knew the best person in the world to provide it, and that best person happened to be a former Liberal member of Parliament. Wow, what a coincidence. Great coincidence. $237 million contract, which went through FTI professional grade of Guelph, Ontario. Guelph. The Public Health Agency of Canada, received the 10,000 ventilators and then just put it into their strategic stockpile, which currently has 9,000. Remember, it's funny how news comes up and down. That was the big thing. That's where they're talking about the lockdowns. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. Lock everything up, crush businesses, separate families, guilt people, scare people. And why? Because, well, we don't have enough ventilators. We don't have enough hospital space. We don't have enough ICU space. So yeah, in Alberta, we spent what, billions, but these field hospitals that were supposed to make ICU areas and all these ventilators, because that's what was going to happen. Everybody was going to get COVID at the same time. We were all going to need ventilators and we're all going to die. Well, 90% of them were never used. And it wasn't because of their masterful treatment of us. It wasn't because the lockdowns worked. It's because we didn't bloody need them. But there's a very happy Liberal member of Parliament who owned the company that managed to sell 10,000 of these things for $250 million and only have to actually use 10% of them. Nice work if you can get it, eh? Man, it's just, let's see, of the 944 Baylis ventilators used to treat COVID patients, 350 were offered free of charge to India. Well, if India needed them, why are we sitting on 10,000 of them anyway? I don't get these guys. But then those were suspended. Oh, okay, because the New Delhi authorities complained the ventilators needed a different electrical cord and it didn't work in India anyways. Oh man, these guys, it's just levels and levels of competence going on here. But I'm sure they put out a sole source thing for a power cord converter that the government could buy for another $10 million. And we could perhaps send those out to India to help them use all those ventilators we bought that we didn't use that they probably didn't need either. It's insane. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get out of the hole these nutcases have dug over this whole pandemic thing, these excuses. But I mean, the corruption is starting to sink through. There's so many investigations we got to follow up on since the whole COVID thing hit. And a lot of it, was just whether they even had any justification to invoke the Emergencies Act. And it's looking like they had absolutely none. They're embarrassing themselves in committee. The minister in charge of lies, the public safety minister, Mendocino, every time he's asked about something, he lies and he gets called on it and he just keeps lying. 11 times he lied saying police asked him to invoke the Emergencies Act. And now it's proven, no, they didn't. So, I mean, we've got this whole bit of corruption from these entitled liberals who feel like they can lie to us with billions of our dollars and control our lives. And now we've got this sole source scandalous crap going on right now with these guys giving contracts worth hundreds of $millions to their former buddies, former Liberal member of Parliament. We need follow-up, criminal follow-up on this. And if it wasn't criminal, fine. I mean, I'm not going to say at this point, God, we don't need to get sued around here. Let there be an investigation. Maybe you could really make a good case as to why, out of all of the suppliers in the entire world, that was the only one that could provide those ventilators. In fact, you were so confident of it that you didn't even put it out to bid because coincidentally, your Liberal member of Parliament buddy happened to be the best possible option for it. Maybe that was the world's biggest coincidence. And if you guys could prove it, I'd like to see it. Until then, I'm going to be pretty confident you just screwed us. And it's usually a safe bet when it comes to our government. So let's go on one more story before I talk about an advertiser and get on to our next guest, who did show up, unlike that first guest. I'm going to be yelling at Bill about that a little later. Live show challenges. So 110 frauds inside one federal agency. So this is the Canada Revenue Agency. Yes, 110. These are the ones that come after you like angry jackals if you were $1,000 short on your tax return or something like that, all over you, up one side, down the other. But it sounds like 110 of their employees were actually committing fraud anyways, or at least were investigated for such in the last few years. 20 were fired. Hey, wait a minute. Isn't fraud a crime? How'd you just get fired? I mean, if I stole a bunch of things in most private areas, I'm going to get fired. But chances are they're going to come after me for it too. I bet you not one was charged. It says it was the highest number of known frauds in any federal public department or agency, the highest known. And these are the CRA. These are the ones who run our revenue agency. And yes, rife with fraud. Data provided from discipline records shows, 100 and some. Everything from misuse of government charge cards to fake sick leave. I mean, it may sound minor, but, it's a matter of principle. These are the guys, like I said, that are telling us what we can do with our lives. They're coming after us for our money. They'll charge us. They'll seize your bank accounts. But they're committing crime within their own department. This is more evidence of a government that is sick to its core. Everything from the former member of Parliament, who again was that business genius who managed to get that $250 million contract, to these members of bureaucrats within the Canadian Revenue Agency who feel they can screw with everything from theft and embezzlement, it says, falsified expense claims, personal use of agency charge cards. Let's see, a number of other things, falsely registering attendance or actions that result in receiving a remuneration for time not worked. So in other words, they're putting time cards in because we probably gave them the honor system during the pandemic. Oh, just send us a time card because we know you're working from home, right? Yeah, they're doing such a good job. Try and get a passport these days. They send all of them home too. How's that all working out? Oh, here's some other beauties. Apparently, forgery, falsification, alteration, or suppression of agency documents for personal gain or the benefit of others. Again, that sounds like one of those things I would imagine we should see some criminal charges on, shouldn't we, or something? Well, let's see, the Canada Border Services Agency, they had 109 employees investigated for fraud. 6 were fired. But in none of these, I'm not seeing any charges anywhere. Strange. Now, if I do anything fraudulent at the border, I know those agents are certainly going to have my ass charged pretty fast. It's not an area you want to get in trouble in typically. But again, this government is broken. It's sick. It's problematic. All right, let me talk about one of my sponsors, and actually it ties in quite well to my next guest who I'm going to have on right away, and that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys have been sponsoring us for quite some time, and they've been a good resource for me as a firearm owner, and they're a resource for thousands and thousands of others. Their name says what they are. They're an association of people who enjoy shooting sports. That's whether you collect firearms, target shooting, skeet shooting, hunting, any of those things. I mean, all these things we want to do, our rights, our abilities, things we enjoy. Well, this is a network. This is where you can, meet up with other firearm owners like any other association, or look at the videos, all sorts of resources on ways you can safely utilize firearms and enjoy them. I mean, ladies' day at the range, all that sort of stuff. Plus, most important of all, I think, of course, is they bring the news to the front and advocate for you as a firearm owner. I mean, they're standing up for your rights. They have they've put out multiple legal challenges against different types of legislation coming from the federal government. It never just seems to stop. They're pushing back. It's a tough battle, guys. And if we don't work together, we're going to lose it. Guarantee we can lose it. Maybe we'll still lose it even if we do get together. It's a tough one. I don't know. But we're guaranteed to lose if we don't try. These guys, take out a membership with them. It helps them help you and stand up for your right and ability to protect your property. And I mean that property even being of a firearm, because it is your property as well. And your right to do with it whatever you please, as long as you never hurt anybody else, which is what we all do. Well, all the sane ones among us anyways. CSSA-CILA.org. Okay, I'm going to bring in Adam Patterson of Korth Group, and we're going to talk some firearm stuff. So hey there, Adam, how you doing?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on here, Cory. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. I guess just to start with, we kind of explain Korth Group and where you guys land in the firearm industry. Like, you're not a storefront retailer or things such as that. You're more of a distributor, right?
Correct. Yeah, we're an importer and distributor for a variety of firearms, ammunition, optics, and accessories lines. We've been in business since 1977, and we satisfy a market of independent dealers, box stores, chain stores, military and law enforcement. We have a group of sales guys that span the country, and they are product experts in their field, and they work their areas and work to grow our business in those areas.
Excellent. And you're an Alberta-based company, though, right? You have a presence across the country, as you said, but you're from out this way. I just like to...
Yeah, we're actually down in Okotoks, so quite local. Most of the people here in the office are born and raised Albertans. I'm not, but they gave me a pass, and it's worked out well coming out west.
Well, we accept you Eastern immigrants, when you behave well enough. So
thank you.
I appreciate it. So, I mean, part of what I want to get into, and I've talked with people from the firearms, I guess you could say lobby almost, or activist groups, people like CSSA, but something that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, especially when we get grabs or issues like this, is that it is an industry. There's a lot of people employed in this. There's a lot of facets to the whole world of firearms. People, if there was any other industry that you targeted and could potentially put so many people out of work and put so many businesses out of business, we'd have a hell of a pushback. But with firearms, they seem to get a pass.
Isn't that the case? And the challenging thing we have here as firearms owners is that we don't really have a hard written gun rights law like our neighbors to the south. So one angle that the industry's taken is an industry organization, which is essentially the business version of the CSSA. The business version is called the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association, and their mandate really is to lobby government to protect the industry. We may not have a right to own firearms per se, but we should have a right to earn a living and be able to do that employment in a field that we find interesting and that is perfectly legal and should be not a problem.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, there are, I imagine, I mean, I don't have the stats over. There's going to be thousands and thousands of people employed in firearm-related fields, everywhere from a retail storefront all the way to, well, often it's volunteer or member-led, but ranges out there and hunting associations. All of these things can fall by the wayside. All of these industries can die if we continue to let this government just keep basically disarming the entire country.
Absolutely. And I can actually provide a few bits of info here for you for numbers. So back in 2019, the CSSA, which is the industry organization, and the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters commissioned the Conference Board of Canada to conduct an economic impact study of the industry in an attempt to use that info to help sway government to say, hey, there's so many people that make their living doing what they love, let's give them a break. So just some quick numbers for your viewers. So just over 25,000 people responded to the survey. And then the conference board used that data to extrapolate out what the total impact would be for fishing, hunting, sport shooting, and trapping. We'll focus mostly on the hunting and sport shooting today. So 1.3 million Canadians in 2018 hunted, and they spent an estimated total of 5.9 billion hunting in Canada. In the same year, 1.4 million people were sport shooting, and they spent 2.6 billion. So the total impact to our economy that in 2018, and that's just the most recent data we have, was $8.5 billion spent and over 25,000 jobs supported. And as you said, Cory, that's people that work retail, distribution, reps, outfitters, guides, people that are tied to the ranges, anybody that may have a hotel or a restaurant that caters to these events. So it's a fairly sizable amount of people across the country that make their living doing something they love.
Yeah, I was about to say that there's a lot of indirect employment and benefit and things to communities. I worked in the oil field for 20 years, and we'd get a lot of the people trying to. It's an industry that gets quite abused as well, quite often by some ideological governments, and they like to understate how much impact we had in areas when we have crews moving out. But it's not just directly employed people in the oil field. When I'm out there in the field, I'm buying fuel, I'm eating food, I'm staying in restaurants, I'm shopping in the local town that I'm staying in. Likewise, hunters, I mean, they're a very transient group. You could say maybe it's the wrong term, but they're on the move. They go into areas for a period of time. It employs people. There's a lot of, particularly in isolated communities. I mean, guiding is very important to a lot of Indigenous communities for people going out hunting. And again, that's under threat if a person can't have a firearm. Absolutely.
And so much of our industry is more rural and suburban based. And, the money that's generated at these independent businesses, and over 90% of our retailers are family run, mom and pop independent businesses. They're in small geographic areas that may not have the same opportunity some of the bigger centers have. And all the money that's generated in the store and wages to the staff is spent back in that local economy. And as you say, with hunting, generally we're not in urban centers when we're harvesting animals. So you're going into the more remote, more backwoods areas in some cases, and some of the small motels and hotels and B&Bs and whatever rely on that travel throughout the hunting seasons to keep their business afloat.
So right now due to the proposed anyways firearms freeze, particularly with the handguns, we already, I imagine you guys have suffered from supply chain issues over the last couple of years like everybody else. So particularly with that, I'm guessing shipping must have been a bitch. There's been quite a run, though. I mean, now finding a handgun for sale is darn near impossible. It seems they've kind of, on the short term, had the opposite effect of what they wanted to do.
It sure appears that way. An initial expectation from the government, from what we've been told, is that they assume most Canadians would sort of tuck tail and cower and wait for Bill C-21 to be passed. And the initial pitch was that the first reading happened a couple of weeks ago. They had the second reading, I think, last week. And the initial concept is that third reading and royal assent for Bill C-21 would be achieved in the early fall. But Canadians have reacted, in my opinion, the correct way and purchased every handgun they could find. It's been phenomenal. There's never been a run on handguns like this ever in our history from everybody that I've talked to. And so because of that, it appears now as though the feds are trying to push the third reading and royal assent before they break for the summer, which I think is late next week. They wrap up for the year.
So my beloved public safety minister said we got to rush on this, and I would hope that they can stall this. This is a big piece of legislation. This has a lot of potential consequences if they ram that through that fast. Well, I can see the lawsuits already starting. I mean, people who invested and done things because of the basis of this legislation being on the way, and for them to rush it and stop everything in transit, I don't think it's going to end well.
Well, and it'll have zero impact on anything other than disrupting independent business and people spending their after-tax dollars to recreate the way they choose. And that's what everybody in the industry has the biggest issue with, that with this handgun freeze, they're calling it a freeze right now, but we'll see what happens. Most of our dealers, 30 to 90% of their business is geared towards handgun sales. And so it isn't just the firearm, it's the accessories and it's upgrades and repairs. When consumers are walking through a retail store, they are going to end up, impulse buying other things that may not be related to a handgun. And if they're not able to buy any new firearms, we're going to lose that foot traffic coming into our retailers.
Yeah, that's another good point. I mean, it's just like when you go into a grocery store, they stick the dairy and the meat in the far back for a good reason, because they know you're coming in for that, and chances are you're going to grab a little more on the way. You never see the hunting section in a Canadian Tire up by the front doors. They make sure I walk by all that impulse buy crap that usually I do end up leaving. I went in to get a box of 22 shells, and somehow I spent $200 on other stuff while I'm at it. But it's a real important facet. I mean, you kind of chuckle about that, but this is integrated with a lot of businesses. How do they fill that space? How do they keep people employed? What do they do if these areas are suddenly gone?
Oh, exactly. And how do you make up that revenue, and how do you keep your staff employed when you're going to lose what could be your entire business? We have dealers that their entire business model is catering to the sports shooting competitive handgun community. And it's going to be really challenging for them to pivot and try and reestablish themselves as a hunting store or something else entirely when they've built a brand around handguns.
Yeah. So getting a little farther, I mean, regulating stuff to death. It's another area that it's not. This is a sense of how they're going to be doing it anyways. But I remember way back in the 90s, you look like you might be a little young to remember most of that, but with the big battles of the registry back then, something that had happened due to that was, and that registry failed, but every firearm dealer was suddenly going to have to spend, I believe it was like $35 per firearm to register their stock in the stores. Some of them had hundreds and hundreds of firearms. I mean, this was a sudden expense of far more than they were willing or able often to take on. So what they did, I remember walking into one, and that shooting range is gone now, but they actually had a bucket full of 303s that were all laying there. They'd had them for years. And they said $50 each, grab them while you can before the registry gets here. And off they went. I mean, again, it was another run on gun sales. It was a liquidation sale in that case. They were just trying to get rid of them because nobody could afford to hang on to them. But did that make anybody safer? Did it make anything better? Did it improve anything? In fact, the registry got thrown away eventually.
Well, anybody that bought those Enfields sure made out like a bandit with what they've become value-wise now. They're one of the most coveted milsurp guns out there. So hopefully people made well on that deal. But you're absolutely right. There's no positive outcome from any of this. The hard reality is that people are going to lose jobs, and it will have zero impact on anything other than those job losses.
So just a side note, since we do have a live show, I got commenters asking, Brad Haugen keeps asking, he's looking for 303 shells. Maybe you might know about it. They're apparently really hard to find. Is that a supply chain issue going on, or do you have any idea?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's real delays in everything right now as we're experiencing everywhere as consumers. Part of the challenge is that the ammunition manufacturers face that there are only so many companies that provide the raw materials, your brass, copper, lead, powder, primers. There's only so much of that product to be had, and we've seen unprecedented volumes in the last 2 years, partly because of COVID, partly because of various things going on in the US. Canada is subjected to supply chain challenges, as is the rest of the world. And I know the manufacturers are doing their best to try and get the product up here, but we see the panic buying tends to breed more panic buying, that the guy that might buy one box of 303 and use that for a couple of years couldn't find any last year, and now when he does find it, he's going to buy everything he can get his hands on. So it does sort of perpetuate the issue of not enough ammunition being had across the country.
Yeah, it's just getting disrupted all over the place. And again, with panic buying and hoarding, and it doesn't help anybody. Again, doesn't make anybody any safer or anything either. That's the frustrating part, is they always make the case that this is somehow going to make the society safer. So, I mean, you're part of that commercial association. You guys are of the legal arm of firearm sales. Handguns, I mean, heavily regulated, very controlled, very well documented, tracked. You don't deal with your firearms being used in crime, so you don't see that down the road.
No, I mean, the very, very few legal firearms are used to commit crime. The vast majority of the crime guns that are found in Canada are smuggled into the country. And that's a really hard hurdle to overcome ultimately. But regardless of what we do as a legal group, there's always going to be that criminal element and always going to be access to illicit firearms. And I think the challenge for the government is how do you deal with that problem ultimately? I mean, lots of people joke that drugs won the war on drugs because they can't stop them from coming in the country. How are they going to stop the illegal firearms? We legal gun owners are an easy target. Politicians can stand up and rant and rave about how unsafe guns are and how dangerous guns are and so on and so forth. And they have an active list of where each of us live that own handguns in this country and what we own and when we bought it and how it's supposed to be stored. So it's really easy to come after the law-abiding gun owner simply because they know where we are and it can appear as though they're doing something to combat gun crime.
Well, that's it. It's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, anybody who is purchased a handgun. I mean, this legislation's been in for decades and decades and decades. You're registered. You have to have a range membership. You can't transport it. You have to take a course, restricted firearms course. All of these things. The people who would go through all of those steps in order to get a handgun, it says two things. For one, they very much enjoy and are dedicated to their handguns for target shooting or whatever else they may like with it. And also they're rule-following, law-abiding people. They're following the process. They're doing everything right, and then they're getting targeted by the government for having done it.
Yeah, they sure are. And some of these people are competing at the club level. We've national competitions, international competitions. We have a couple of pro staff brand ambassador type shooters that work with us that are both on the Canadian IPSC team. And IPSC is an action shooting sport where you're trying to be as accurate and fast as possible to shoot a pre-set up stage. It's a pile of fun. If you've never tried it, I highly recommend trying it. But these two guys are on the Canadian team and are going to Thailand next year to compete for Canada at the world level in IPSC. So this isn't always just a casual plinking on a Sunday afternoon type thing. These guys are shooting 80,000 rounds a year and replacing product and buying backup guns and spending massive amounts of money on their sport and their hobby because they're so passionate about it.
Yeah, so again, as you said, we're just starting right now with a freeze that they're eager to get onto, and I won't necessarily expect you to speculate. I suspect they have no intention of stopping there. That's just step one before they move on to seizure. But is your industry association then getting ready to try and challenge this, like from a association point of view or anything like that?
There's certainly an interest to try. The biggest challenge that we have as an industry is that our voice really is not heard. We were fortunate with the previous public safety minister. His office was willing to speak with the industry. The current public safety ministers are not quite as free-flowing with conversation with us. And quite often, anytime there's a firearms panel to be created, the industry is left out of it. The focus is primarily on victims groups, which, for a mother that's lost her son in a drive-by shooting, it's horrendous. Everybody's heart goes out to her. Anything that they change, though, would not have changed that outcome. So the biggest challenge for us right now is that we would like to see some change. But with the current structure of the government, with the Liberals NDP partnering, they're both very much anti-gun. The Bloc is anti-gun. So really the only group that's standing behind us are the Conservatives. And there just isn't enough of a voice to have an actual say at the moment.
Yeah, well, they play on a lot of emotions. I mean, nobody wants to see, of course, those horrible stories when firearms are misused and people die or are hurt. But I mean, it's just a villainized industry, and it's just been so wrong. And that's a bit of what your association has to try to counter. I mean, the most comparable industry I can think of is like the tobacco industry that got chased around. But the difference is there's no safe or really realistic case made that can be made to consume tobacco. There's no real good reason to smoke or anything else. There's a lot of safe, harmless use of firearms or even productive use of firearms, whether it's for hunting or target shooting or collecting, all of those things. They aren't going to hurt anybody. So, I mean, I don't think it's fair to compare that industry to tobacco, but it's getting the same abuse as tobacco.
Yeah, it sure is. And, the biggest problem we face as an organization, as an industry, and as users is that a lot of Canadians that are not interested in what we do are indifferent or ignorant. And I don't mean ignorant in a negative way. They just don't know. So when they hear these politicians spouting off about making Canada safer and yada, yada, yada. It makes sense, right? They don't realize that there is a massive increase of women and girls participating in shooting and hunting, and what an inclusive community it is. When you go to these events, there's people from all walks of life and all backgrounds and all classes and different languages, and it's so awesome because they've come here and they weren't allowed to, or maybe minimal access to firearms in their home country, and they've come to Canada and they can participate in something they're passionate about. And that side of the sport is never shown. It's always everything, the messaging in the legacy media focuses so much on crime and a lot of issues that don't even happen in our country. This Bill C-21 miraculously was released 10 days after a bunch of children were killed in Texas. Personally, I think it's in poor taste on the government to have done that. They did the same thing after the mass killing in New Brunswick 2 years ago, and used that as a great springboard to launch their plan to get rid of guns. And they're really not shining the correct lens on our sport at all.
And I'm glad you also brought that up. It was something I hadn't thought of, but you're right. Is this the social cost? I mean, these ranges, these hunting groups, these clubs, these sporting organizations, this is where these are the social center for a lot of people. That's where their circle of friends is. That's where they get together. That's where they have annual banquets, all of these things. Because I was talking earlier about actually some of the costs of the pandemic lockdowns. And again, I don't want to tie that so much into this, but that's a social cost. When you suddenly isolate people and get them stuck in their households rather than getting out and socializing, they can have a hard time. And there's a lot of people whose big social focus is around something firearm related. And if they lose those, that harms people as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so much of what we do is a family and friend based activity, like you said, Cory. But there's a generational aspect of this too. We have dealers that are second, third generation ownership, and dealers that have been in business for over 50 years. And here, as I mentioned, we started in 1977, and Terry and his dad started the company at that time. And now, the next generation's involved in the business. And it's such a great community that really we're not ever displayed, in my opinion, the way we should be to the public.
No, and again, if any community, I think at all, is going to be most opposed to the criminal use of firearms, it's all the people who responsibly use them because they're tired of getting labeled and potentially losing their rights. So
it's very bad for business.
That's another aspect I won't get you to speculating on. But when you criminalize the whole thing in the works, there's going to be a number of people who just decide, well, I'm no longer going to abide, and then now you've created criminals rather than solved anything, and it's just not an improvement whatsoever.
Well, absolutely. And if I could just throw another comment on that, Cory, that one of the big challenges all of us face, whether we're in industry or as users, is the lack of communication. So, a few years ago, the government prohibited Ruger 1022 magazines that had the capacity of more than 10 rounds. And so there were hundreds of thousands of these 25-round banana mags, as people would call them, the Butler Creek mags primarily, that were now prohibited, but no communication was ever sent out to the populace to let them know. Industry knew because we could no longer import them. But me as a gun owner that owns a 1022, I never received any communication to say that, hey, this item is now prohibited. And there have been people that have been caught with them, whether they knew or not, I can't speculate. But the communication is really lacking. And even from the industry side, we're not told when changes are going to take effect. When the May 2020 order in council was as of May 1st, and I think they told us on April 30th, the AR-15s are now banned. We have inventory. Dealers have inventory. There's product that's now stuck in a type of purgatory that we can't sell, and we can't easily export back to the US despite the government telling us that we can. That's not how it works. So there's a lot of product that's tied up at all levels of distribution and supply chain that cannot be sold because we were not given any notice to maybe cancel orders or try and clear what we had before the ban took place.
Yeah, I guess. And even on a smaller level, I mean, one of the changes they're looking to bring about with this legislation, I mean, I've got a little Rimfire 22 that has a 10-round magazine in it. And if this legislation goes through, suddenly that magazine is going to be illegal for me to have in my possession. Plus, everybody, I guess, who owns a business that sells those or distributes those magazines is now holding onto a criminal item. They're either going to have to destroy it or I guess just take a loss.
Yeah, well, it's yet to be seen, and that change is actually going to come upon us by order of council. So we will be told someday, whenever that's going to be, this week, next week, September, we don't know, that all of a sudden we can no longer import or sell any firearm with more than 5-round magazine. But the feds didn't separate rimfire or firearms that have an internal magazine, like an old lever gun, for example. So the challenge now for us as importers is that the manufacturers are going to need to build Canadian-specific product SKUs so that your 22 rifle is now shipped with a 5-round magazine instead of a 10-round magazine. So there's going to be delays and complications with the ordering process, and it's possible it'll drive costs up because now the manufacturers have to build a special makeup SKU for Canada where they could just sell us the regular product before. So the trickle-down impact of this is massive, as you say, and all the inventory that's out there. People that have hundreds of magazines or across the country, hundreds of thousands of magazines that are now going to be prohibited, and all that value will be gone, and you might get charged if you get caught with them.
You might even forget the magazines in the back of your cabinet there, and it's sitting there. I mean,
exactly.
It's just ridiculous. Well, all we can do is keep pushing and keep hoping. I appreciate you coming on to talk about though. And like I said, I just wanted to, because you don't hear the conversation enough, lend the industry viewpoint onto this. I mean, there's a lot of people very dependent on this industry, working directly within it, and they don't get a voice at all when these legislations come along. So I appreciate you coming on. Where can we find more information about what your group does or where you're at?
You can check us out at korthgroup.com. We also have pages on Facebook and Instagram. And thank you, Cory, and your team for having us on, because as you say, we don't get a chance to really speak from the business side. And we really appreciate the opportunity to prop Korth Group up a little bit and to speak about what we do. And I sure hope that we see some positivity out of all this at some point.
We like to support good Alberta businesses, and
we appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Adam. We'll talk again soon. Maybe we'll have some good news to talk about. So yes, that was Adam Patterson of the Korth Group. As I said, it's a company based out of Okotoks and nationally, and they're a distributor, not a retail storefront, but again, very established, respectable firearm company. And that reminder, these legislations, these come down, they're going to put a lot of people out of work. And as Adam brought up, things I hadn't even thought of. Yeah, the social aspect. Suddenly, not everybody can change hobbies and social groups on the turn of a dime. Like, these things are important to a lot of people. And this government is just witlessly going after the law-abiding firearm owners. I mean, if they could make a case that it's somehow going to make us safer, I could be a little more receptive. If you could show how this is going to save lives, this is going to reduce robberies, this is going to, reduce the gangland activity. But it's not. It's not on any level, and they can't make that case. That's why they want to rush this through. They're not rushing because they're fearful some mass shooting is going to happen because my 22 rimfire didn't get modified to stop it from carrying 10 shots, or because somebody's legally purchased handgun suddenly went out on a rampage. They want to rush it through because they don't want to face the questions. They don't want to actually have to justify this. They don't want to have to point out, because, police chiefs, you want to hear somebody who's often in opposition to these kinds of moves? It's usually police chiefs, because they got to deal on the ground with the real crimes. And they know that this won't help them a bit. This won't reduce it. That's not their area of concern. But the government wants to look like they're doing something. It's similar to what I was talking about on the drug addiction issue too. It's a big, complicated issue. If you want to talk about firearm crimes, there's a whole deep area worth of study to go into. How do we deal with troubled young youth who get into gangs? How do we deal with the smuggling that's coming across the border? How do we deal with the contraband that is feeding these gangs and giving them the money in the first place? What are they fighting over? Well, usually it's a turf war over drugs. A lot of this ties together. But does any of this get any safer by going after target shooters and skeet shooters and duck hunters? No, not a bit. And as we're pointing out, it's multi-billions of dollars of industry in a legal, law-abiding, harmless firearm industry in Canada alone. And these clowns are going to criminalize it and shut it down. That's where they're working towards. It's a real problem. And again, we talk to gun activists and advocacy groups and things like that, and that's important. But I really wanted to talk, and I appreciated that out of Adam, though, with showing it's a business side. If it had been any other business, again, some people be standing up. You say, hey, you're going to put a bunch of people out of work. You're going to harm a lot of lives. And, another area, that social aspect, since I'm on it, because I'm worried about people's mental health. We talk about that. We talk about the ones who unfortunately do go off if they have a firearm and they've had a mental health issue. I mean, anybody who's going to go out and shoot, randomly and so on, obviously has mental health issues. Sane people don't do that. And we want to keep people sane. We got to keep their social structures, got to keep their support around. One of the things I remember when the lockdowns came in, and I used to own a bar, and I sold that bar right before the lockdowns started. And one of my memories of the bar, though, there's a lot of memories, and most of them were negative. Oh boy, if you want a real workout, the most work for the least amount of money you could ever have, own a bar sometime. You really got to love it. So hats off to those people who do love that business, because it's a tough, tough area to make a living. I mean, Jane and I pulled it off, but it wasn't easy. But what I had was a lot of regulars, a lot of people who would come in. Every bar has them. Everybody who goes to bars semi-regularly knows it. You have your regulars who sit up in the front. A lot of them actually often don't even drink a lot. Well, some of them drink a lot, but a lot also it'll be one or two beers, because the most of it's there to socialize. They're just to go after work, and they know each other by first name, and they're people from different groups. And a lot of those guys, that's the only social outlet they had. And women, some. That's their thing. They go to the bar 2 or 3 times a week to have some beers and chat with some others. Otherwise, they're just at work and they're just at home. And I really feared and worried for how those people were doing when the lockdowns came and the bars were shut down and people weren't allowed to go and socialize face-to-face like that. They didn't have, close communication. They wouldn't go to visit the houses of other people they met or knew at the bar necessarily, but that bar was the spot. Then you try to defend it. Well, it's just a bar. It's not important. Well, actually, to some people, it's very important. Very important. And they lost that. And again, I think that's a lot of what contributed towards things like addiction and loneliness and depression and things that have happened over the course of the pandemic when you took away that outlet for them. Because there were some people who had nowhere else to go. Likewise, you go to a range, check it out. A lot of the people you'll see, they're chatting with each other. They know each other. They spend more time sitting outside in the waiting area or just in the showroom shooting the shit than actually shooting. I mean, you can only spend so much on cartridges. That's because their friends are there. Their buddies are there. They do events. They do competitions, or they just hang out and talk. And that's their social spot. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about how that could be damaging to take that away from some people. Some people who were never harming anybody at all. And you're going to take that out. This government is just, again, so witless and short-sighted. They're going to cause so much damage in this country. All right, let me talk about one of our sponsors before I get on to a little more news here. And that is Bitcoin Well again. I just want to expand a bit more with Bitcoin Well about part of what they do and offering services. Because again, you see, they take this digital currency and they make it into something that makes sense to you and makes it easy for you. So like I said, one of the things we have here at the Western Standard is a savings plan. They've set up here that with Bitcoin Well, a portion of my salary every month goes into a Bitcoin account and Western Standard matches it. These guys will hook your company up with that if they want to, or maybe nag your boss, or maybe you're the boss and you want to do that for your employees. And it's voluntary, of course. I mean, if you don't like digital currencies, you don't have to have part of your check go into it. But it's a good little side savings program, into something else altogether. As well, they've got ways just to set up so you can pay your utilities bill with it, or pay a number of things. They get ATMs all across Canada so you can deposit money into your Bitcoin account. Like, they make it practical, not just something that you throw a few bucks in and then just watch and hope for the best. You can use it like any other currency because it is a currency. And they're non-custodial. That's something they say over and over again, which means you always have your own money. They don't take your money and then do something with it on your behalf. They just facilitate the transfer. So it's always safe in your hands. So if you're looking at other services, always watch for that, even if it's not bitcoinwell.com. But hey, go to bitcoinwell.com. These are the guys sponsoring us. But if they're not, if they're custodial, if they're taking your money, you better let those alarm bells go off. That's where you could get in trouble. That's where you could get ripped off. And nobody wants to. We get ripped off enough in life. We don't need our hard-earned money taken by anybody. So check them out, guys. bitcoinwell.com. Again, a good Albertan company. And take control of your money. Speaking of money that's being taken control of, look at these other numbers here too coming up. And this came out a little while ago. It looks like a little more is coming up on it. The kitchen renovation at the Prime Minister's little lake cottage where he likes hanging out. $735,000. That's what they spent on the kitchen area. Yeah. So they're trying to make the excuses for it now. So this is more than most people's houses by a good long shot. More than mine. Well, let's see. Yeah, probably. I don't know. If I find somebody who wants to offer that much, we can talk. But either way, think about that. This is what these arseholes do with the money you get taken from you. They take your money. It's bad enough that they're infringing on our rights and taking our property, but then they take the money we have, as I said, and they give it to their liberal buddies for ventilators that never get used, or give it to the bureaucracies where we got rampant fraud going on. And now they do renovations on things like that. The Prime Minister's own little cottage property, $735,000 kitchen renovation. What can you do to a kitchen for that much money? Though I bet you the contractor this is just speculating, so hang on. I wouldn't be surprised if the contractor was sole sourced and had a connection to a liberal somewhere. But they're saying, oh no, there's more to this. It included the pantry and the laundry area, you know. God, guys, it's 700 and some thousand for a kitchen reno. Don't try and polish that turd. You ripped us off again. The Prime Minister makes 6 figures already. He's already got the other house that he gets to stay in. He lives rent-free in this world. He doesn't pay for anything right now. And then you go and piss $735,000 into his vacation home. Like I said, this is the Harrington Lake one. This isn't even the main house. Costliest kitchen renovation to taxpayers since Governor General managed to do $590,000 at Redo Hall. Come on, you guys. Man, we've got to get rid of this bloody government, the arrogance, the belligerence. And of course, it's not as if Trudeau's got to cook in it himself, as he's got staff and chefs to do that, right? And the public works minister saying these investments are important. There's that word again, investments. Kiss my ass, investment. It's a kitchen reno. You didn't need it, especially tight times like now. When you're telling the whole country to tighten their belts, telling us to buck up, suck it up, lose our property, lose our jobs, get locked down, live on CERB. Oh, but we're going to give the Prime Minister a $700 and some $1,000 kitchen renovation on his cottage, not even the main house. Yeah, somebody else pointing out we're the peasants. Carrie saying we're the peasants. Pretty much, we're the serfs. Let us eat cake, right? This is our government at work, but how kind of them, eh? Here's some of them as well. Let's see. 230,000 are still working from home. Civil servants. So pandemic is all but gone. There's still some, mandates hanging up there, and that's another area of annoyance and infuriation. But either way, there's still 230,000 federal employees working from home right now, and they don't know when they're going to come back. Okay, if you can do it from home, if you can, and I don't know if you idiots can. Yeah, I know not every bureaucrat's an idiot, but there's a really good high chance of it. Competent people go to the private sector. People who just want to coast and milk the system for the most they can typically go to the public sector. So maybe they're not idiots, they're just parasitic. Either way. Look at the passport system. It's taking 6 months to get a bloody passport. Well, that's because all those idiots are doing their work from home. Look, it's the revenue agency, all the rest. You can't get anything fast or efficiently from government as it is. But even if they can prove that some of these people working from home are doing it efficiently, well, then why is it costing us more money? Why aren't we closing some offices? Why aren't we selling some government infrastructure if we don't need them in these buildings downtown anymore? So where's this government at? Is it going to be permanent? It's been a couple of years. Again, there's no legislation stopping them from coming back to work in the office now. Get in there. No, they're still hanging at home. Part of that now comes into a bigger issue too, of course, as you get into the unions, and nobody ever wants to take on the unions. Well, nobody in government anyways. So there's somewhere some of your money's going these days, guys. Beautiful. Let's see, here's another area. $98 million subsidy is for starters. Yes, the CEO of a company who got $27 million in subsidies already for small nuclear reactors says he wants more, basically. I want to see more investment in energy means of generation and bringing it about, but not if you got to subsidize it to death like that. It's not enough, guys. If you can't make it work with the amount you already got, then it's time to go elsewhere. But no, he'll probably get more. As long as you use those magic words. Climate change. And make everybody greener, right? As long as you're making everybody greener, the government will throw more money at you. This guy knows what he's doing. So they'll throw more money at this clown. And again, the rest of us pushing and slaving along, well, again, you're going to have trouble getting those kinds of things. Here's one from BC. We didn't have Reed, and he's our BC reporter there and everything, but this one's interesting. The BC Liberal Party is in the midst of deciding whether or not to change the name of their party. I guess their delegates on the weekend said that it's time to move forward the process. Probably a really good idea. That party, a lot of people get confused with it. BC's screwy politically in every way. They love to be that way out there. I'll give them kind of credit for that. But their Liberal Party is basically their version of a Conservative Party, but it's got the Liberal name. They're not actually directly connected with the federal Liberals whatsoever. But that misnomer does cause confusion. The Conservative Party of BC, which goes under the name of the Conservative Party of BC, is a small sort of fringe sort of party. It doesn't really get anywhere. This is just a strange evolution of things. It's kind of like The NDP went, well, the Social Credit went down, which was the conservative type of party in BC for a long, long time. NDP took over for a long time, and they needed some sort of conservative option for the NDP, so they kind of joined up together around the Liberals, and they managed to get into power for quite some time. But now they're having a tough time trying to get those NDP out again, so they're thinking of changing the name of the party. I think they should. In Alberta, I mean, the Liberal Party, and people won't even use it for toilet paper out here. They got, I think, 1% of the vote in the last provincial election or less than that. Yeah, that's a fantastic remnant of a political party. For the first political party that held power in Alberta. Let's give some credit, where it's due to Khan, who was their last leader of it, because he was a reprehensible, terrible leader, and he led them to their worst possible outcome. And I just like shooting at him because he's a bit of a dork online who gets on my case. So, hey, here's back to you, Khan. Good work. Nice legacy. Liberals, I like seeing them go down in any province, whether it's here or elsewhere, or even through a name change. All right. And, Pamela's saying finally, and she's been saying it for years. Good. And yes, Drew saying I could build 2 modest homes for, what Trudeau got for his cottage kitchen renovation. Doesn't it feel good to work hard and pay your taxes for that sort of thing? All right. That's enough bending your ear for today, guys. I'm going to come back tomorrow. And I've got Aurora Townsend on. She's got Planet Theta. This is something a little different. I'm going to get another guest as well. I hope I'm working on things. It's tough scheduling this week. And what she's got is a virtual world. She's working, with the software company is tied into the meta universe, but actually the world where people go out, virtual reality, socialize, build their worlds. It's kind of like the Sims that we remember as older folks in computers, but way bigger, and more what you see in science fiction and so on. It's getting there. And people develop relationships on there. And part of what she's got going, I guess part of the problem with these virtual reality worlds is that some women are getting abused or harassed and they're unsafe on there. So they're trying to create a safe space. So unfortunately, it sounds like perverts and jerks, weirdos, doesn't matter which world you go into, they still habitate those areas. But it's an interesting development, and this virtual world is going, and I'd like to talk to her on a few things because I'm curious about it. I think I'm too old to be interested in that sort of stuff and everything now. But is it necessarily good too? Is having a world full of everybody introverted and in these virtual worlds a better thing for us? I don't know. I mean, she's going to say, yes, she's developing a business on it. That's fine. I don't expect her to answer those things, but it's just an area of big curiosity. It's developing and it's going to be big. So that'll be a neat conversation. And of course, there'll be lots of other news and ranting and things on my behalf tomorrow as well. So thank you for tuning in today, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp.